Good morning and welcome to the Christ Central Devotional. I'm Alistair Semple. I'm one of the team here. And we are going through our series looking at the Gospel of Luke. And I have the first 11 verses of chapter 6. So I'm just going to put those up. I think that should do it. And we'll read them. So on Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath?" And Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he'd heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" He looked around at them all and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. So why is this a big deal? What's actually going on here? Well, if we come back to this first passage here, there's a question which is clearly posed from the Pharisees. Verse 2, "Why are you doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath?" And this goes back to walking through the fields, picking some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands, and eating the kernel. Now, what the disciples are doing there is gleaning. And the Pharisees, gleaning is okay on a Sabbath. And particularly if you come from a poor background, that's not a problem. You can do that. And so what the Pharisees are kind of expecting there is we're going to get into a conversation about how to correctly interpret the law. Because technically they're allowed to pick the heads, yes. They're allowed to eat them, yes. But actually rubbing them in their hands, well, that's a form of work. And technically they shouldn't do that on the Sabbath. So the Pharisees are expecting a sort of typical Jewish, usually male, disputation about how do we interpret this law? This is an honorable thing. This was not a weird thing. We tend to think of it as a weird thing or a nasty thing or a mean thing. But for them, they're just looking to think, how do we best honor God? How do we best understand his word? How do we interpret it? And so they then get into the nitty gritty of, well, this rabbi thinks that. And actually, when Moses said this, didn't that apply? And that's what they're expecting. And that would be normal and that would be okay. Different people interpreting the law, having a good sort of normal argumentation around it about which precedent works best in this situation. But Jesus then answers them and said, and this is verse 3, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions got hungry?" And so they'd be going, doop, 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 because they know their scriptures well. "He enters the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for the priests to eat, and he gave some to his companions." And they'd be going, yeah, when David did that, yeah, okay, it wasn't the fresh bread on the altar. In that story, what happened was it was the old bread. It was the bread which was taken off the altar, and that bread technically belongs to the priests. So it still shouldn't be eaten by the guy, but there was a priest there, and the priest gave it to David and to the men. So the priest was able to authorize it because he was the one responsible for the bread, and So why is Jesus telling us a story? Because that wasn't technically breaking the law, because if they'd taken it straight off the altar, the fresh bread, that would have been a problem. But the priests inherited the bread after a week. It's stale. They can do with it what they like. They gave it. There isn't a problem here. Why is Jesus using it as an illustration? And then Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Now that there's no comment about, but the next the next issue on another Sabbath is what Jesus means when he talks about being Lord of the Sabbath. So the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, verse 7, were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. Part of the disputation, part of all the talking about, what we can do that honors God, involves an awful lot of thinking and agonizing over what people could do on the Sabbath. What was restful, what was okay, what was the sort of thing that God intended for humans to do on the Sabbath, and actually what was restricted, what was not God honoring, what was limited. And they've determined that in non-life threatening situations, where there was no emergency, even things like healing, those were work which could wait until Monday or Saturday or the Sunday or whatever, but not on the Sabbath. You didn't need to. If a person was perhaps in exceeding pain or close to death, maybe then, but you'd have a conversation of, why is this a particular way? Jesus knew what they were thinking, verse 8. And he said to the man with the shriveled hand, get up, stand in front of everyone. So he got up and stood there. And so here is Jesus essentially putting on display this man. And then he puts on display the Pharisee. Jesus says to them, I ask you which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it. Now, again, these are people who are very aware of the conversations, the disputations, the argumentation around the law. They're trying to honor God. And they know things like, for instance, that if your donkey falls into a well on the Sabbath, then you can actually help a donkey out. And elsewhere, Jesus actually says this and quotes this and sort of says human beings worth more than a donkey. If a donkey in distress is in a difficult situation, it's okay to rescue it on the Sabbath. Then a man in distress or a woman in distress is more valuable than that, and it would be okay. Now, he doesn't actually give any argument here, at least not in the text. He looks around at them, and all these things are going through their head. And quite possibly, this thing of him saying, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. He doesn't tell the man to do any work, stretch out your hand. The man did so. His hand was completely restored. Jesus hasn't touched him. No work has been done. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious. Why? They began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. So why are they furious? And what's this thing about David and the stale bread? The story with David and the stale bread turns on the fact that there was a priest present there who had authority to actually permit David's men to have the bread. He was able to keep it all within the law, in what the spirit of the law allowed. He was a man with authority. Jesus said, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. It's one thing to interpret the law when you are in a sort of specialist minor area, but who gets to interpret one of the 10 commandments in a way that actually is not just, now this is what Moses said or something like that, or this is how Rabbi someone said it could be worked out, but actually says, I'm the one of authority here. I get to interpret the 10 commandments. I get to tell you how they're best applied. He's not referencing anyone else. He's referencing himself. Now, very difficult not to actually say here, is this a prerogative of the Messiah? But even the Messiah is under the law. So who is this man who comes in and just says, actually, I'm telling you something which is over the law. I'm getting to say this law applies in this way here, like this. Now, elsewhere, again, in the scriptures, you'll see that when the crowds are hearing what Jesus was saying about different things, they were absolutely amazed because he spoke as one with authority over the law. He wasn't a man apparently under the law in the same way everyone else was. So the Pharisees were furious. And you can understand why, unless, of course, the man you're talking about is the Son of God. So when we are today thinking about what the heck is going on in Ukraine and what the heck is going on with the world, and how do we make sense of the outcome of this and not just the details of human suffering and all the tragedy that's currently ensuing and will roll on for decades at the very least. We've got to remember as believers that we don't get caught up in the petty, the small, the arguments, the rights and wrongs. We trust in a God who commands. We don't look to the laws of men and women. We don't look to the dictates of people with big sticks or large guns. We look and throw ourselves on the mercy of the God who created us. And ultimately, that's where our peace is. That's where our hope comes from. And that's where strength is in the midst of chaos. And actually, well, the Pharisees got furious at the thought that Jesus had that sort of authority. Actually, that's the thing that gives us peace. And that's my thought today.